I am the Reverend Adrienne Koch. I'm the priest associate at Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland, Ohio, and that's the cathedral for the Diocese of the Episcopal Church in Ohio. And it's just a joy to be here with all of you on this special day of remembrance, on this day of inciting one another to action, a day of prayer, where we remember those who are being trafficked as human beings and who have been, and to try to stop it from continuing. And I want to just give a special thanks to Bruce Freeman and the others that are connected to the Cleveland area chapter of Episcopal Peace Fellowship. Those are the folks that worked hard to organize this event with the cathedral and to have representation from folks across the diocese of the Episcopal Church. So we're grateful for that work, and I want to hand the mic, so to speak, over to Bruce, who will help give us some guidance as to how the conversation will go forward from here. Bruce?
That's great. Thank you very much. And great service this morning. It was really wonderful. I had a lot of folks comment during the service how much they appreciated it. So thank you very much. Well, the plan for the balance is to leave this more as a conversation as opposed to anyone being expected to make a formal presentation. I had sent around to many people some suggested topics on this subject, and I'll just go over those briefly in a minute, but we can pick among those to discuss further, one or more, or there could be other topics that we didn't think of that you may want to bring up. So that's all good. So before we get started, if you don't mind, I just wanted to give a brief overview of some of the things that caught my attention. And this today is the official United Nations World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. This has been a United Nations event for some time. And as many of you know, the United States Day Against Human Trafficking is in January. So this is a little bit different. This is in the last day of July. So this is the United Nations Day, and the proclamation came out just very recently from the United Nations by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And this year's World Trafficking Day Against Trafficking in Person honors the first responders. That's probably the most significant element of the proclamation for today as far as human trafficking is concerned. Like the frontline heroes saving lives and sustaining our societies, these providers are keeping vital services going throughout the crisis, identifying victims, ensuring their access to justice, health, social assistance, and protection, and preventing further abuse and exploitation. And he concludes this abbreviated version: if the world is to put human dignity and human rights at the center of the COVID-19 response and recovery, we need to do more to protect trafficking victims and prevent vulnerable people from being exploited by criminals. On this World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, let us pledge to work for inclusive societies and economies that leave no one behind. And just a note, in our work with the Episcopal Peace Fellowship Group, we've been looking at human trafficking, and a recent report came over the news brief that from China to Ireland, human slavery is still a big global problem. It's not subsided to any degree from a world standpoint. And I'm looking forward to hearing what some of the experts here had to say about the United States and Northeast Ohio in particular. But I was kind of surprised to learn that Ireland has made its way to the tier 2 country as far as evidence of serious violations occurring within the country as far as trafficking and transporting people from Vietnam, China, etc., to places beyond Ireland, within Europe, etc. So that really struck me and struck others as a surprise. And from the Ohio Department of Health, as many of us here today know, it's the fastest growing criminal industry in the world, human trafficking. The money is estimated to be more than 35 billion, not million, billion, which is equal to the profits earned by Starbucks, Google, and Nike combined. So it's substantial. One or two other things. My experience with human trafficking 2 years ago related to, I was involved in a trial for human trafficking in Summit County. And this was the first person in Summit County under a trafficking in persons law in Ohio. And I was one of the jury candidates for that trial. And I spent several days listening to all the testimony prior to being selected to be on the jury. And when it came time to eliminate one more person from the jury trial, they decided I'm the one to eliminate off the list. But that trial was interesting. It never reached a conclusion because he pled out as opposed to wanting to proceed further with a jury trial. So that's how that worked. Darren Townsend got 14 years in prison, and his partner in this effort, Pearl Coffey, got 6 years in prison for their actions to recruit young women for prostitution. Sample topics. The first one on my list here is the effects of COVID-19 on human trafficking in Ohio and Northeast Ohio in particular. And I'm not going to pick anybody to respond to this. I'm going to see who would like to respond to that because I haven't heard much about that. So,
well, I probably can start. And most of these are anecdotal rather than any hard and solid statistics at this point. But what we're hearing from our partners is that human trafficking has not gone away. It is alive and unfortunately rather well. A lot of it happening online instead of in person in terms of sex trafficking. And the other piece that our partners are worried about is the desperation that so many find themselves in because of a loss of a job. And they become desperate for income to support their families. So they are prone to be trafficked for labor as well as perhaps for sex. So those are things we're hearing about. Some of our partners have said that the confinement that people are feeling puts them also in troubling situations that may trigger their experience. If they're a survivor, it may trigger what happened to them before. And if they're currently being trafficked, they're even more isolated than they were before. So those are all anecdotal stories. We don't have the hard statistics. And in fact, nobody does, as far as I know, have really good statistics in this state or any other state for human trafficking at this point.
I would just say, just to piggyback off of that, is that because of COVID-19, the vulnerabilities have for sure increased. And we're seeing that in all across America, all across the world, whatever that case may be. But the key thing that a trafficker uses or targets is your vulnerabilities. So the more somebody is vulnerable during a pandemic or during hurricane season or during an earthquake or doing any sort of disaster that's happening, it creates more opportunity and vulnerabilities for a trafficker to connect with a victim.
And this is Renee. I'd like to add that we have definitely seen an increase in the number of people that we serve. We're a direct service provider. And during the total shutdown where we had to be closed for a short period, we went online. We tried to use every method we could to stay connected. But once we reopened, it has just been really, really busy because for victims, a lot of them are struggling with isolation, being taken advantage of. And I've just been floored at the amount of people that have reached out to us. Once we were opened, we started getting a lot of calls. And so we've had to be very careful how we do things because we can only have so many people at a time, but we have definitely witnessed an increase in this crime and the number of people that need assistance.
Renee,
Yes.
is there an increase in the younger ones, or what age range are you seeing more increase?
So we mostly see, so we do a lot of things to see increase. We have our services at the center, but we also do outreach in lots of neighborhoods that have high areas of prostitution and trafficking. So we see a lot of activity on the street, meeting people that would not normally come into your facility. That's why we do the outreach, to reach those that are underserved. And I'm just floored at how many people are reaching out for help that don't know, didn't know that anything was available to them. So we are seeing a mixture of young people who may be on the streets, maybe running away, maybe they don't have a job, don't have a good family home, but lots of adults. So sort of like a mixture.
For some of those in this group, Renee, would you please discuss what are you are doing for the survivors to offer them some hope?
Okay, you're asking me that question? Want me to share? I think that's what you're asking. You want to know what the center does.
That's what it sounds like, Renee. And I was wondering the same thing for those of us that don't know the full scale of your work.
Okay, so we're a direct service provider. So we have counseling, we have individual therapy, we have support groups, we have horse therapy, social outings, all types of things that we try to do to help people recover. So those are things that are offered in person at the center. We also do online support groups and services too, because we have people like, right now there's a group going on right now as I'm on this call with the Salvation Army, because they have a lot of people, sometimes they don't have the transportation to get there, but we want the people to stay connected. So being able to offer a Zoom support group is better than not having any contact at all. So those kind of services are also available. When it comes to street outreach, we go to these different neighborhoods and provide outreach services, and we get other partners to join us who have resources that can help people. So for example, we may have like Belfair, who they have a runaway program for youth, and they have a lot of resources that can help any kids that we come across on the streets. It's a chance for us to share, what services are available. We provide students to do medical checks and all kind of little services. We feed people, we give them personal care items. And Cheryl, thanks to you, we're able to give them some masks because a lot of people that we're encountering, they don't even have any masks, don't have the money for that. So those are the kind of things we're able to do.
How many survivors are you currently working with?
Well, we usually have, I would say during the week, since we've been back open, we probably have had about at least 10 to 12 a day that come in, and we only see them by individual appointment to make sure that we don't have more people in the building than we need to. So we do it like that. Groups we try to limit the groups to maybe 3 or 4 people at a time. To have small groups. We got a larger space so we can have the proper social distancing. But every day you'll get a call, like today's a group day. I've already gotten 3 calls from people that have never been there, but they know that we're open and there's a group and they just want to learn or seek out service. So it depends, but that's the kind of average what we're experiencing right now.
Thank you. I'm wondering if with any other groups represented, if you'd like to share a little bit about the work that you do, and particularly with an eye toward anyone in the room who may not know all of the resources available. And then also as we record this and make it available for folks as a resource, if there's anything that just someone who's new to exploring advocacy against human trafficking, if there's anything that would be helpful for them to know that's available in this area.
I can begin a little of that. The Collaborative to End Human Trafficking has been around since 2007, and our mission is to educate and advocate for the prevention and abolition of the crime while connecting services on behalf of trafficked persons. So we're not the direct care providers. We're doing lots and lots of education. And now we meet with about 60 organizations and agencies in the greater Cleveland area and the region, and also we have representatives from the Ohio Attorney General's office and the prosecutor's office, and businesses in the area like the hotels, colleges and universities. The healthcare systems are all represented. The social service agencies, Renee is one of our good partners in that. Belfair, Salvation Army, many are working together. So we're not duplicating services. We want to use our resources and our gifts to weave a safety net for those who are victims of the crime or those who are vulnerable for the crime. So that's the point of our work. We do lots and lots of education, and just raising awareness becomes the first step. So if you've seen those billboards around town or the signage at bus stations that say human trafficking happens here too, that's one of the pieces of the work that we do.
Thank you. And I see Elizabeth Krupel. I see that I have your hand raised. Just want to check if that's intentional. You are more than welcome to share.
It is intentional. I didn't want to cut anybody off though.
Sure. Please do share.
Oh, okay. So I had brought something to Bruce's attention before the meeting today, and he invited me to share. And then while I was listening, I remembered a couple other things that I wanted to pass on. For people who have been victims of domestic violence, stalking, human trafficking, rape, or sexual battery, the State of Ohio Secretary of State Office provides a program called Safe at Home. And this allows people who are victims of the aforementioned horrible atrocities, they have an opportunity to protect themselves from the voter rolls so that they can vote without having their whereabouts publicized. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. People have to register with an application assistant, and the Secretary of State's office has a whole listing of all the different application assistant locations throughout the state. You can register family members, minors, incompetents, or wards of the state, but other adults have to register in person. It's free. It protects your identity from your voter rolls. And they also offer internet safety tips at the Safe at Home website on how to clear all your different browsers so people's information can't be tracked. And there are posters and brochures available to raise awareness for the Safe at Home program from the Secretary of State's office. And if you would like to get involved, they also offer opportunities through the Secretary of State's office to become a trained application assistant. So if you just Google Safe at Home, Ohio Secretary of State, all that information will come up. And then the other thing, trafficking doesn't happen without transportation, usually. And a couple years ago when I worked in a logistics company, a program called Truck Shield caught my attention. The Ohio Highway Patrol sponsors that, and they encourage truck drivers or others to dial pound 677 to report drug activity, impaired drivers, or any other suspicious type of activity that they see on the road. Truckers Against Trafficking has a hotline, 888-373-7888. So if you know people who do deliveries or transportation, you know, you can pass that on. Even in your own company, when your truck drivers may go out to distribute your product, maybe your fleet team might need to know this. And then the State Highway Patrol also offers a Community Shield program, which is training on the same thing for non-truck drivers, so just regular people out in their vehicles. So those are all available, to help spot trafficking or suspicious behavior out on the roads, because a lot of that trafficking involves drug activity as well. So these are just some other programs that have been out there for a while, but you may not have run across them.
Thanks, Liz. I see that Kate has put her hand up. I want to check in with Kate if she's got thoughts or questions that please do share.
Well, I just thought maybe now would be a good time for me to chime in and share about Abolition Bakery, which is a little bit a lighter thing. My friend Rita, 7 years ago, decided to start Abolition Bakery. She had, early in her retirement, had learned about human trafficking and was really compelled to do something. And at the same time, she was in some baking classes and learning about professional baking. And so she decided to start a home bakery and donate all of the proceeds of the baked goods that she makes and sells out of her home to organizations who work with trafficking survivors and also provide education about human trafficking. And then she also is a trained educator, so in sort of non-COVID times, she will go speak to groups about human trafficking, and she's a good friend of mine and a very inspiring person. And it's sort of a nice thing if you think about like a special occasion that you have coming up and you want to buy some baked goods to honor that occasion. She makes beautiful cupcake bouquets. She makes very good sweet sourdough bread, scones, cookies, all sorts of things. And she can do like a custom order for you. And I know she had provided some biscotti at Trinity when there was a Episcopal Peace Fellowship table. So some of you may have even had the pleasure of tasting her biscotti. And I'll post a link to her website in the chat if anyone is interested.
Thanks, Kate. That's great to know. Even just when we all start eating together again, for us to know that at Trinity for larger events.
I'm happy, unless somebody else has their hand raised, I'm happy to introduce the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Initiative. Before I do that, we were fortunate enough to get some of her biscotti when we came up to visit the collaborative and visit Miss Renee and her empowerment center. So it was a wonderful day. We got biscotti, the collaborative, and Miss Renee all in one day. So it was a great trip up to your part of the state. I am Jen Rausch. I'm the legal director of the Human Trafficking Initiative for the Attorney General. Dave Yost wanted to have a group within the office that was more proactive or was, going out on behalf of the Attorney General and kind of really using the powers of that position to have a more direct impact on everybody's human trafficking efforts. So kind of like, I don't want to say using the big powers of big government, but basically that's kind of it. Jomel was the first member, and I'll let her give you her background. I started in September, but before that I was with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for almost 20 years. I was in our Special Victims Unit for 15 years and ran it. So ran it the last 6 years that I was there. In Columbus, we handled all of the felony level sexual assaults, a lot of the offenses that Elizabeth was talking about when she was going through with the Secretary of State information. It also included human trafficking. I was the dedicated prosecutor for that for the last 7 years. So even though I was in charge of people the last 6, I bossed them around, but I still got to handle cases. So I handled cases, and I am fortunate enough to also work in the federal courts, and the Attorney General let me continue that. So I get to stay in the courts, but kind of help do work here for the Attorney General, help do big good. And one of his big goals for the initiative, in addition to just being able to use the powers of the Office for Good, were to improve our response in general. So there are so many places like what you have in your community that are doing things really well. And then we have other places in the state that don't have any kind of resources or don't have any structure set up. And so we have been going around making connections, using you all as an example, putting people in touch with each other. One of my jobs specifically is to help build up the law enforcement response in Ohio. We have 3 human trafficking task forces in Ohio, but they don't cover the whole state. So to sort of build that up, work with prosecutors and law enforcement so we can have a better court response to these kinds of cases when possible. And then we're also working on education, prevention, all of those kinds of things. So a lot of the things that Elizabeth was talking about with documentation, paperwork, poem cards, posters, things of that nature, we have for free as well. And so we have great resources. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel, much like Sister Ann was saying. We don't want to step in and think that we know all there is to know. We're really getting to know everybody throughout the state and have been so amazed with everybody that we've been able to meet, and connected a lot of great folks, which has been exciting. So we would love it if Ohio had this great united response to human trafficking. I should do like an evil, powerful laugh at the end of that, but that's sort of our dream goal. So
Only it would be a laugh.
You want to hop in?
Everybody, I'm Jomel. I'm a Director of Victim Services for our Human Trafficking Initiative. Prior to coming on board at the Attorney General's office, I worked for 2.5 years on our Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force, where I was the embedded full-time victim advocate there with our team of detectives. So all of our operations and our stings and their investigations I'd be present for, and work with the victims all the way through first time meeting them, whether that was at a hotel or at the local jail or at prison, on the streets, and work with them all the way through prosecution, and do case management with the victims as well, and kind of help them begin that road to recovery, getting them connected with counseling services, with jobs, reunited back with their families, learning how to budget, connecting with their kids, things of that nature. Getting them an ID card, that's something that's super hard to do. It can take quite a bit of time once you're coming out of a situation like being trafficked. And so just did that, and that's how I got to connect with Jen. She was our human trafficking prosecutor in Franklin County. And I got to work with Emily once I started off at the AG's office. And that was kind of like a good, I'm here in this new role. I get to connect with people that also have the same passion as well on human trafficking. And then prior to that, I'm from Florida, from Broward County. So I worked in Palm Beach County, Florida, which is located in West Palm Beach. And I was there for 6.5 years, where I was a victim advocate and victim witness coordinator for our domestic violence unit, our misdemeanors crime unit, batteries, assaults, dating violence, stalking, DUIs, you name it, all of those things. And so part of my training had to do a human trafficking class, and that's when I realized this is the population I want to work with the most. My mantra has always been to be a voice for the voiceless. And so I was like, all right, God, wherever you send me, I'll go. And he said, Columbus, Ohio. So here I am. Moved here in 2017. And it's just been really great being able to work and connect with so many different people across the state. So thank you for having me.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Billman. I'm the third member, the baby of the group, is what I call myself. I'm the anti-human trafficking coordinator for the initiative. Prior to joining on, I led street outreach for a nonprofit group called Out of Darkness in Columbus, where we would just kind of be the front lines, first point of contact with individuals on the street, and then connect them with the drop-in center, and then later helping upstart their hotline and rescue team for their safe house that they started here in Columbus back in December. And then prior to that, I had worked for the Senate as well, and then had an internship with the Attorney General's office, where that's where I was connected with Jomel, and kind of worked with their external affairs, their legislative and policy team, and then slowly into the Human Trafficking Initiative, looking at the different gaps that we were seeing in Ohio and jumpstarting that, and was offered that full-time position back in July to start this past January. So it's been a whirlwind for sure, but we're really thankful that we get to connect with all of you today.
A couple of our bigger things that we also would like for you guys to know about is we hosted our very first ever Human Trafficking Summit in January. Jomel and I had a hot second to get it ready, and we hosted over 500 people in Columbus. So we are planning on working on that for January of 2021. We hope to make that an annual event where we bring all these kinds of different stakeholders and survivors into the same place to learn from each other and make these kinds of connections. And we also have something called the Human Trafficking Commission, which has existed under previous Ohio Attorney Generals. However, we have been working very hard to sort of reimagine and reinvent it to make it even more productive than it previously was. they did a lot of great work, but we're really trying to amp up those efforts. And so we've been working on that, and some of the people in your area are part of that and working very hard for us. So those are just some more of the other efforts we've been working on.
A couple of our local projects that have had some success and are still in process have been, first of all, working with our hospital systems. We have them all working on actually implementing formal protocols. They have agreed on guidelines that they would all support. Doesn't matter which the system is, even though they usually compete on everything, they're not competing so much on this. They're working together with those common guidelines to institute protocols so that all the staff knows, they know how to respond, they know what services are available, they know whom to call. So we've been working on that since 2014, I believe, and there's still work to do on it, but it's coming. Another of the initiatives has been to work with our local law enforcement because they are key to the process, and they have together decided that what they want their best practice to be would be that when they encounter someone that they believe is being trafficked or could be being trafficked, their first stop with that person will be a hospital. So all the more reason our hospital staffs need to know how to respond. And what they wanted for that information was what they call a ticket box card. If you've ever been stopped by the police and they get out and they have a metal box with them, that's a ticket box. I didn't know what it was until we started working on this. So together with the collaborative and our law enforcement friends and some folks from healthcare, they developed what the best practices would be. And now we're in the process, almost completed the process of distributing those ticket box cards to 88 police departments around the region. So that's moving ahead. We're almost done with getting that word out. They also want a model policy for the area, so they're working strongly on that. And the third initiative has been, well, actually two more. The third one would be working with our hospitality industry, the hotels, and working with Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association. Members there have said, you know, trafficking is not good for business. We don't want it here. So what they wanted was a 30-minute presentation in person for their staffs, which obviously we can't do right now. They also wanted big posters that list the best practices for them. So we have the big posters, we've begun distributing them, and we've begun doing the education, and now we're just waiting until we can do more education. If they can set up some virtual meetings, we'll do that. However, their staff isn't there, so we're trying to figure that out. So that's an ongoing effort. And the third one is with our EMT and fire departments, because they're first responders. They will see this and they need to know about it. So the EMS and fire are working with some of our sexual assault nurses in particular to figure out what are the protocols or what are the best practices, and they've defined those. And now how do we get that information to all the vehicles and all the personnel? So that also is in process. So we have several projects going along with the resource guide for all the areas in Northern Ohio that have resources for the persons who are being trafficked or could be being trafficked. So that guideline is available on our website, that resource manual.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one of the additional aspects that Sister Ann mentioned she wanted to see if we could cover, and that's the post-trauma effects on victims, long and short term. And how is that handled as far as these folks suffering short term and then probably long term trauma for many of them? What resources are available for that?
There are probably a lot of us who could begin to address that, but several of our partners are definitely engaged with individuals who have suffered, whether it was last week or 10 years ago. That trauma stays with them. So many of the professionals talk about and are actually practicing trauma-informed care. and they've learned what that is, and we're teaching those who don't know what that is so that they know how to respond and interact, including our police officers, so that they know how not to re-traumatize somebody just by, first of all, believing them, believing what happened, what the person says, not judging it, and not interrogating to the point where it just makes people suffer more. In an instant where they're called to the hospital, perhaps, they will not even do the interview then. They will introduce themselves and say, I'm going to come back and talk to you later when you've had some time to rest, and then we'll have a conversation, because it's just too traumatic. So that whole element of trauma, that trauma doesn't go away. People learn to live with it, and some have better days than others. So it's a real challenge, and it's one of the aspects of education that we're very concerned about, is for our professionals in particular, in whatever field they are. Does that help?
It does. Yeah, I remember at Trinity, actually, there was a woman who had come to a couple services and sat with one of the Trinity members. And one day after the service, she was out in the open area, and she was having difficulty with language, expressing what her needs were. She was Eastern European, and she had been at the homeless shelter nearby, the women's shelter. And she apparently had a ticket to fly back to Ukraine, but she had no friends, no money, no information. All she had was this ticket. And she wanted to see if we could help. And somebody at church at the front desk offered to take her to the airport. But it was a matter of people paying attention to some of these red flags that did catch everybody's attention.
I'm a retired police officer, been retired about 25 years. So I'm not current in that respect, but I can tell you that back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of traffic going on. I was in Phoenix, Arizona. And so there was a lot of stuff coming up from south of the border with Mexico. But right now I'm just kind of getting caught up with what's going on and working with Sister Ann and getting as current as I can so I can help them by going out and doing presentations. But this is great. It's nice to know all this extra stuff you don't normally get, in some of the training and all. So I appreciate everybody's input on this.
Thanks, Marty. Yeah, I did have a question that I didn't list out, but it's a question about legislation that's pending in the state of Ohio that is relevant to human trafficking and where things stand. Who might know about that?
I can give you a quick rundown. So currently we have 4 bills. One is a duplication of all of those bills. 3 of those are in the House and 1 is in the Senate. We have made movement on one, which was a public Johns database. It's titled the Sexual Exploitation Database, where it would create a database for Johns, the buyers, to go into the database. That is currently in the Senate Judiciary Committee for review. We have a receiving proceeds bill, as well as Senate Bill 13, which is Senator Fetter's bill, is to raise Ohio statute from 16 to 17 to the age of 18, which would match the federal definition of human trafficking victims. And that is currently stalled out, and it was amended into the Johns database bill. So we're kind of keeping a look at what's happening with that. And then we are separating the sentence between, Jen, you might have to correct me. Is it soliciting versus engaging? Is that it, the title? Yep. And that would just help our law enforcement and our prosecutors when they are going through the process of investigation. And Jen can maybe speak a little bit more about that, but that one has not made any progress as of yet.
Why not? It just hasn't?
It just hasn't. I think sometimes things just get pushed quicker than others. The legislatures who are pushing the other bill have been very good about getting a hearing into the committee process. And unfortunately, the other one has not received a hearing yet.
Yeah, Liz Kropel just put up a question. Are we decriminalizing
we are not decriminalizing. But Jen,
Yeah, so the point of that, part of that bill is to separate the offenses. So right now in Ohio, if a woman is arrested or charged with soliciting, it's the same as if a John is caught purchasing. So they're both charged under the same exact statute. Even though there are different subsections underneath it, it doesn't really make a difference. And so what the goal is to separate those out and make them two distinct offenses. And then for the engaging, there's soliciting and engaging in prostitution. And for the Johns, then it provides additional penalties, mandatory fines, things of that nature. And the thing that I'm the most excited about with regard to that is that it provides for what we call enhancements. For example, when you have the offense of domestic violence, the more convictions you have, the more serious future offenses can be. You can get up into the felony level offense. And for this offense, then the more convictions a John or a purchaser of sex would have, then they have the potential to be charged with a felony, which is a huge deal because I believe some of the research, at least in Columbus, indicates that if a man is charged with this offense, their average penalty is like an $87 fine. So it's lower than a speeding ticket. So really kind of putting some teeth into the demand end of things. So I understand there's definitely a great argument as it relates to decriminalizing, but I think that the prosecutor in me gets a little bit nervous about that because some of those offenses are how we get a lot of our women into catch court and a lot of the services and things like that. So I sort of struggle with the decriminalization piece, but really the biggest goal is to separate the purchasers to really attack the demand end.
hey Jen, there's a question that says, please explain how those who are trafficked with no access to escape is still criminal then. Perhaps I don't understand. I don't know. I think you could potentially touch on that.
Yeah, so it really would be more the only time they're going to get charged is if they get arrested in some sort of sting. So they're going to get, so when you have a law enforcement officer who responds or is out on the street or responds to an ad, and then the women would get charged with something called soliciting. So that then becomes the reason behind it. If they're willing to disclose their situation, then is what gets them into catch court and things like that. Where they can get some of those services, and through some of those courts, they can get those things taken off their record. And there are a lot of things available to victims like that. So I don't want it to be, I don't want people to think that victims then who have been trafficked have absolutely no recourse and are just going to be sent into jail. But again, a lot of times that's how we get them in front of a lot of services.
Yeah, I had read a couple days ago something about the Ohio statute has a provision there for expungement.
Yeah.
But the feeling was that it's kind of vague and not very well worded, and there was some feeling about that. So
yeah, expungements are always a mess, if I'm being honest with you. The language, even as it comes to any other kind of criminal offenses, what I can tell you is that the legislature has greatly expanded the availability of expungement. So an expungement is when you go to the court and you ask to have these convictions taken off your record. So imagine it as a clean slate. So typically you can only have that done for your first offense and in certain kinds of offenses. So obviously we don't want people that sexually assault people to be able to have that expunged, right? So there are exceptions to that rule. But what we were seeing is kind of what Elizabeth's asking, if you get charged with something and you're charged with soliciting and later on you come forward and you disclose that's because you were a victim, the changes to the statute allow people that have more than one conviction, perhaps they have drug-related convictions because they have been trafficked, as long as they can provide sort of this background and the information, they have an opportunity to have more taken off their record. And I know that Judge Herbert down in Columbus had recently had some hearings where there was a woman that had a lot of charges. I don't remember, Jomel might remember the exact number, but she had a lot of charges removed from her record. And Jomel, what did she say? Did she say that she had taken her life back, she had taken all these things back, but now she had finally gotten her name back, which was really, really powerful. And so the code does allow for some of those things. It does give more protections or expungement availability to people that have been trafficked. And I will say Advocating Opportunity, that has an office over on the other kind of over from you guys, and then they have a Columbus office as well. They do a lot of work with regard to that too.
Yeah, I remember with the Marilyn Cassidy's court, we went to hear her speak, and she gave an emotional presentation, I thought, but it's very difficult for her to go through a whole process with people that she loves, and then only to see them say, I'm going back. And she tries what she can to prevent that from happening. And I'm just wondering, is that a common experience, that the desire to go back to that lifestyle, or the having no other option prevails often?
I'll speak to that for sure. Working as a victim advocate, there will be so many times where what a victim has been experiencing that has become familiar and normal, right? So if you're used to being in an environment of dysfunction and you're no longer in that environment of dysfunction, it does take a while to get used to, or sometimes it just feels like I don't belong in this non-dysfunctional situation. So it's easier, and at least where I was before, everybody's on the same page. We're all understanding what we've all been through. There's no judgment there. But now that I'm out of that situation and I walk into a room, I feel like everybody's seeing the things that I've been through. Or I feel like I don't know who can I trust, who I talk to. Are people going to look at me differently when I say what I've experienced? Versus I worked with a victim, and she said it was easier for me to go back because at least I knew my trafficker's rules. At least I had other women around me that were experiencing the same thing that I've experienced, and they understood. And so it can be quite an adjustment when you're leaving that situation. It takes time and counseling and healthy support, right? You also have what happens in that lifestyle. You are used to also seeing fast money. Within 30 minutes or an hour, you're making a certain amount of money. And then now you're out of that life and you go to apply for a job. You may not have very much work experience, and you're being offered to make $10 an hour. And you say to yourself, I could make this whole paycheck for the week in a few hours. Or if you haven't addressed the trauma in your life yet, and that's also a work in progress, those triggers can also send you back to that situation, or send you back to relapsing if drugs was part of how you coped with trauma. So there's so many reasons as to why somebody would go back, and it does take time and intentionality with the people around you to still be welcoming and connect with you. So on average, when we would go and meet with a potential victim, it would take anywhere from 6 to 7 times talking with the same person before they decide, okay, now I'm ready, right? Now I believe that you really see me as a human being. You really want to help me. And no matter how many times that I've left, you still welcome me to come back. And I know that this place is safe. So it definitely takes time after someone's experienced, abuse and trauma.
Yeah, I think this one case, the judge had multiple sessions with this woman for over a period of time, and she thought this was going to be a successful transition for her. And then the last meeting that she had with her, she said, oh yeah, I'm just going back. I'm going to go back to the projects and see my friends. I really need to do that. And the judge, I remember, wanted to, I don't know if she did, but she wanted to intervene and just stop that from happening.
Yeah,
and
there's also times where, because you have made it out and you are on a healthier path, and you say to yourself, I want to go back and help the other women and men that I've met that are in the same situations. And then you might go back and you don't realize that had a stronger pull, and you went there to help, but now you actually got pulled back in. So there's so many pieces to that. When we talked about expungements, you're now on a road to recovery, you're in a safe situation, but you can't get a job because of the convictions on your record. You want to be able to work on the straight and narrow, but every job that you apply for, because of your conviction history, you don't get accepted. Or maybe you go to a job interview and the person who's interviewing you, the person who works in HR, you've done a date with them before.
Yeah.
You go to the grocery store and you see people that you've experienced that they don't remember you, because to them you were you were nothing in that situation, but for you, you might remember every face. So it might be easier or feel easier to maybe go back into that situation where you can maybe numb yourself or at least be around people that understand what it feels like. It definitely takes a lot. And that's why having the agencies and programs that exist that have that wraparound services and that have that consistent care and love and mentoring and pouring into somebody and giving them skills, right? So maybe you never finished high school and you've never been able to really admit, I don't really know how to read. But your expectation based on your age or something is supposed to be something else. So truly having those organizations that have opportunities for victims and survivors to grow in the areas that they have not been able to for quite some time, that is super empowering and powerful.
Very helpful.
I believe it's also why Judge Cassidy and Judge Herbert and others who are running special dockets always welcome back those who may have fallen off. They will always welcome them back and not turn them away when they decide they want to come back and try again.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm from Akron, and I'm familiar with the RISE program through the court system there. It's probably similar to Judge Cassidy's court. And of course, Rahab Ministries it's not equivalent to anything in particular in Cuyahoga County, is it? Does it have some differences to how they manage things? Do you know, sister?
Rahab Ministries is one of the organizations that we work pretty closely with. They're part of the Collaborative's Greater Cleveland Coordinated Response. So there are some similarities in what they do and perhaps some differences as well.
And I was interested in one of the folks from the Attorney General's office said there's parts of Ohio that have no coverage at all. That's just absent. And they're like deserts of no available resources. That's kind of a difficult situation.
Yeah, we definitely see in our southern part of Ohio on the east side, so you're up through Appalachia, there's just really no response down there, especially because when you look at those counties who cover such a broad area, there may only be 2 deputies who cover miles and miles, as well as they're the investigators, they are the domestic violence response, they're all of these things at once. So when you get to these human trafficking cases, sometimes they just don't have the resources to continue to respond or look into those, as well as just an awareness down there. And on our western side, there's a map on our initiative website where you can see where all the human trafficking coalitions are, and there is a big gap on both the east and west side of Ohio. So that's part of what we want to do, is help raise awareness and also uplift and create new coalitions for those areas. But yeah, it's definitely something that we see. We hope to see progress soon or at some point.
Yeah, I think, aren't things a little different down there with West Virginia nearby and Kentucky? That whole coal mining areas. They've never had great prosperity to begin with.
And a lot of it is an underprivileged community as well. And so they don't even always have internet access. So that's also a barrier when we're talking about our youth and then kind of where they are geographically located.
It just sounds like our area down at Columbus as well is fortunate to have people working very hard for developing all the resources that possibly could be. And is there one state that stands out as being a model for Ohio, or is Ohio the model for other states?
I would say that there are quite a number of states that have that are doing leading things under different categories. So for example, in Texas, you have a very specific labor trafficking focused movement that is happening there. In New York, you have something that is very specific to Johns. So they have a program where if they have like fake ads for somebody who's looking online to purchase sex, and if they text that number that they're trying to set up a date with, it actually will be a robo text that says human trafficking is wrong, and by you texting this number, you are attempting to engage and kind of like educate this person. Also, law enforcement is quite aware of, so it's kind of like this situation to kind of get in front of people who are purchasing sex and give them education. So it really just depends on the demographics of what does human trafficking look like in that particular state or in those particular areas. And so when we talk about the southeastern part of Ohio and there's less services, that doesn't mean that there's less people who want to address the issue, right? There are plenty of people who are passionate and wanting to address not just the issue of human trafficking, but the issue of poverty, the issue of drugs in those areas, the issue of criminal activity, the issue of single mothers, the issues of medical resources, you name it. And so at one point, southeastern Ohio for sure had a lot of money coming through there, right? When it came to the iron industry and all the other industries that were down in that area. I learned an interesting fact that the first NFL team started down in Southeast Ohio. Never would have known that. And so over time, people started moving out, or things have changed in those areas. The coal mining industry or iron making industry has definitely changed. So when you see there's a lot more resources maybe in the downtown areas of bigger cities, is not void of people that have come from those areas. So it's not that trafficking is not happening in those areas, or you only see it in the bigger cities. It's also that wherever there's a need, people are going to go to. So we see a lot of times where there's victims that are coming from rural parts of Ohio and they end up being trafficked in the city. Or we see people coming from the city parts of Ohio and they end up being trafficked in the rural areas. So it all comes down to, again, vulnerabilities is the number one thing. And so if you have areas where drugs are being made, where you have people that have mental health illnesses that are not being addressed, where you have somebody where maybe it's a town where it's considered normal that abuse is just part of the environment. And that could be in a rural area or in a city or in a suburb, So it just kind of really depends on what's happening in a particular county, a particular city. And you may have one town that that's doing a lot because you have a lot of buy-in and ownership that is coming in from the mayor, from the police department, from the court system, from the hospitals, from the nonprofits, from the faith-based communities. And so you have this almost this community-centered response. And you may have someplace else where the champion who is trying to make things happen is only the health department and that's it. Or it may only be a nonprofit and that's it, or a homeless shelter and that's it. So it really kind of depends on what you have going on in that area.
I think that's where we talk about this thing called the multidisciplinary approach that we're trying to create, especially in Ohio, is what Jomel was saying, bringing our hospitals together with our law enforcement, with our social service agencies, because really with this issue, you have to have everybody. You have to have buy-in from different areas in order to create the best response. So that's to say, so we actually do have some really good things going down in southeastern Ohio. We have a woman named Christy Bartman who is just spearheading awesome work down there, trying to connect with local schools down there and just different attorneys to kind of bring those individuals together. So there's definitely, that's not to say that there's nothing being done, because there is definitely progress. And to your response about other states, I think, Florida has really good things going. California, their legislature, I would say they're good with passing a lot of different policies because they are on the coast. They have, in both of those states, different human trafficking prevention training / that's embedded within their education systems. I don't know how far that is with Florida, but I know in parts of California they have that. So that's something that we would love to have here. In Tennessee, and kind of when you look at these Midwest states, we have a lot of buy-in from our legislatures, and there's things that are taking a little bit longer than it is in other states. And then in Pennsylvania, they've spearheaded an unbelievable program called it's a SANE telehealth program. So to bring sexual assault nurse exams to rural counties so that victims don't have to travel to a hospital that's far or get the proper care that they need. So Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Texas have really big programs. So that's one way that those different states are doing really well. And so kind of, off Jomel's point, I think every state may be taking a different approach that we're all getting strong in certain categories and areas, if that answers your question.
I got one more question, but maybe somebody else does too.
Is there a difference in approach of human trafficking between Southern Ohio and Northern Ohio?
Not necessarily, because again, whether you live in Northern Ohio or Southern Ohio, if you have a vulnerability, that's what it is. So when we talk about vulnerabilities, there's something I like to use, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On the basic level of just being a human being, things that we are in need of is food, water, shelter, air, safe place. So if you are in Northern Ohio or Southern Ohio and you are in need of food, you're in need of shelter, you're in need of, winter is coming, you don't have any place warm to go to, you're in need of feeling safe, and somebody says, I can provide you with that. I'm a friend, I'm a boyfriend, I'm a girlfriend, I'm just somebody looking out for you. Trafficker will utilize your vulnerability as to what you need to exploit you over time. Whether maybe there's another need that you may have, maybe it's love, maybe you have food, water, shelter, but you are looking and needing and wanting love and to be loved and to be valued and seen as valued. And somebody says, I see you, I love you, I care about you. I will never let anybody hurt you. Those things, because they can recognize and they get to know and build trust as to what does this person need, and they'll fill that need while building rapport and building trust, because they have other things in mind later on. But they have nothing but time, right? Because they're not usually, they don't have a 9 to 5 that they're being held accountable for many times. If they do, they have nothing but time to just waste and try to connect with different people. We would have traffickers that will send the same message to over 100 women over time on a social media app or on a dating website, literally just looking for somebody, at least one person to engage in conversation. Maybe you're in need of feeling like you belong to a family. And your experience has been, maybe you're in the foster care system, or you don't have a healthy family environment, and you're looking to feel like you are belonging to a group of people who say, I care about you, and somebody says, I can offer that. We have a group of people right here. Here's what you need. Here's some food. Here's drugs. Here's clothing. Whatever it is that you need. Again, it comes down to somebody choosing to recognize, where are you vulnerable? What are you in need of? Let that person choosing to supply that need, but at a cost later on that the victim does not know is going to cost them in the future. So when you put it in that perspective, whether you live in North Ohio, Southern Ohio, Eastern Ohio, or Western Ohio, vulnerabilities is anywhere and with any person.
I get one last question, and that's schools. All the kids in my neighborhood, they're all running around. They have no school a lot of the time. Is it better from a human trafficking standpoint to have kids going to school versus not having school in session or having school at home with online school? Is that
If we were just dealing with human trafficking, yes, it's much better if they're in school, because then they have access to people who are looking out for them, for one thing. They also have supervision when they're online. They also have meals, and for many kids, if school's not open, they don't have food. So they become desperate. For some kids, the safe place for them is school. So this time has been very challenging. And our friends at Belfair who deal with missing and trafficked youth, they're very worried about where the kids are, because the usual hangouts for kids have not been available to them. Now, does that mean schools should just open right now? We have to balance because of the virus, maybe that's not safe either. It's a very tough decision, but we have to be very mindful of the kids who are at home and help the parents, because my goodness, parents who are having to support the family and be the teacher at home and take care of the house, that's a huge burden, and they may feel pretty stressed. And they also probably, the kids know more about technology than the parents do. And so the parents get pretty freaked about things happening online that they wouldn't know about. So I think there's a lot there that needs to be addressed. There are some very good resources on Shared Hope's website and ECPAT website to deal with technology and children at home and how to keep kids safe.
I think one quick thing too is when we talk about familial trafficking, if the parents or guardians are the ones exploiting them, they're going to be home more with their abuser. So that's the case, I think you would even say, with domestic violence. So our domestic violence shelters that we had been hearing had a spike once everything started opening up, because they were starting to finally receive more calls because they couldn't call because they were at home with their abusers. So I think when we talk about safety with the kids, it goes that way as well. Also, if they're at home, they can be on their phone more and having access to more things that can be a gateway. So we also created a kind of safety resource, app resource for parents on our website. I can attach that as well, that we had created just in light of COVID and thinking about how we could educate parents on just app safety things to know about, and online resources to educate parents and guardians on that. So I'll attach that.
Thank you.
Is there any, I know that the situations, parents are really leery of introducing human trafficking to their kids. Any comments on that?
Yeah. Why are parents leery to introduce the topic of human trafficking to their children? I think it comes down to human trafficking is this big, scary word and concept, right? But again, underneath all of that is other things that maybe parents have not really been talking with their kids about, like healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships, mental health, sexual assault, pornography, purchasing sex, all of these different things that are under this umbrella of human trafficking. What does it mean when it comes to working, and what the labor laws are, and how to speak up for yourself? Who is a safe adult? I know when it comes down to having the conversation, I remember as a kid talking about good touch, bad touch, right? But even that terminology is outdated, because anybody on this call, if somebody walked past you, whether you knew them or not, and they caressed your shoulder in a way that made you uncomfortable, that technically is not in one of the bad touch areas. Am I right? But you know that did not make you feel comfortable whatsoever. But when we have these kind of conversations with children, and we're not putting into context in a proper way, a child who experiences that, whether it's touch on their shoulder, on their head, on their elbow, on their knee, they're like, well, this doesn't count as what I learned is considered bad. And so over time that might get worse. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to having this conversation with children, I think all those other conversations need to also be happening. And that would be part of a discussion, having these healthy and ongoing conversations, talking about what does it mean to be a good friend? How can you recognize somebody who's a good friend, who has your best interest in mind? Who can you talk to at school when something is happening that you're not comfortable with? Who can you talk to at your church? Who can you talk to at when you're home? And to really have these real conversations. So I think the more real conversations we start having with not just our children, but also with young adults, with teens, with older adults, because human trafficking does not only target children, it is a human issue. So whatever age group that you're part of, that could be something that you end up experiencing, or having somebody who's close to you that might experience that. So having this as an ongoing conversation, the same way that we don't just one time talk about what healthy food is. It's usually something that we talk about throughout the year, all the time. So making these topics things that are continuous and part of an ongoing conversation, and that are appropriate to the age level that you're speaking to as well. So I think that would help with the actual topic of human trafficking not being as daunting to talk to children about, when you're also engaging in these other kind of tough conversations, but this child knows that this is a safe space and I have questions. And they're not just learning these other things from their friends or from social media or from the internet because they Googled or YouTubed something.
Thank you.
No problem.
I remember in the book, In Our Backyard, there was one element to it where the daughter was involved with a trafficker in a suburban setting, and the mom actually signed on to what her daughter was doing and became complicit in it herself. So the range of parental supervision is pretty wide, a wide spectrum there.
For sure. Pay attention to the people around you. You're noticing behavior changes, clothing changes, whatever kind of changes that kind of raise the red flag. Like, I don't know if this person's okay. I mean, we have a conversation with them. Many times we end up doing the thing where it's called the bystander effect. Somebody else is going to talk with them, or somebody else is going to notice it. Maybe it's just me. You know what I'm saying? So if we can truly be intentional with caring for our neighbors, the people to your left, to your right, and your families around you, and just paying attention and being aware, and also not being afraid to, you know what, I'm going to call the police, or I'm going to talk to this person. I've noticed X, Y, and Z. This also happens with domestic violence. How many times are we in situations in our families or in our churches or in our friend group where we know something bad is happening in this marriage or in this relationship, but we don't want to be the person to cause any trouble or to bring it up or anything of that nature, when we really need to take hold of that and, you know, help our neighbor, help our person who's in need. Because if we were in need, we'd want somebody to do the same thing for us.
Well, I have one more thing to say, and that's if there happens to be, from anybody here, of the advocates particularly, there's one thing that we can do to move forward with what we've been talking today about, what would you suggest?
Keep having healthy conversations. For sure. I think just having these important conversations within your community. One thing I was just going to quickly mention that off of Jomel was just, what does a healthy relationship look like? How we talking about our mental health. All of those things are intertwined. So kind of having, quote unquote, those tough conversations, it makes it easier when those are ongoing and constant. I also just think working collaboratively with all your local partners is the best thing that you can do, and continue to educate yourself and the people around you on the topic.
I'd like to add, first of all, thanks, Jomel, for breaking that all the way down when it comes to conversation with the parent, because that is something that everybody needs to do, not only with the parents, if you're a grandparent, because I can tell you firsthand, a lot of the victims that we encounter, they wish someone would have had a conversation with them, because if you don't have the conversation with them, then believe me, the wrong people will have it with them, and they won't have any knowledge, so they'll be listening to the wrong person. So I always tell parents, it is what it is. You know, it's not, you would rather have that conversation so they know what to look out for, how they can become vulnerable. And so I would encourage everyone to have that conversation in your family, in your circles, with your children, with your grandchildren, and remember that that has the possibility of saving lives. So that's one easy thing that we can all do. Thank you.
I certainly agree with what everyone else has already said. And I think another thing that I would ask is that you pay attention to what you're hearing or what you're seeing on social media, And if it just seems too bizarre or you just don't know whether it's true or not, check it out before you share it, because there are a million myths out there that don't do anybody any good. They make it worse for all of us. So check it out before you start sharing it. And we know there are lots of myths. Every day we hear stuff and you think, that's really weird. And then when you find out where it came from or what's at the bottom of it, did trafficking happen that way? Well, maybe once. Is that how it happens all the time? Of course not. So just be careful with what you hear, what you see. Check it out if you wonder. And you can always call and ask, and we'll try to figure it out with you.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining with our conversation today. All the advocates in the community that were so enlightening. I'm very much appreciate it. The community being Northeast Ohio and Columbus and Ohio as a whole. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And your insights are really valuable and appreciated information. So I'm going to sign off and thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.